graveyard shift. So I'm really hoping that we are not going to fall asleep because we are about to have an interesting discussion, and I hope everyone will be able to participate. Welcome to our panel discussion, where we'll be trying to frame public narratives about how the public sees and hears LGBTI people and activism in our region. With this question, we are trying to understand what informs these narratives and also what implications do these narratives have on our activism, and what is it that we can do to accelerate the change that we need if these narratives are not in our best interest. My name is Bongani Brian Siveko, and in short, I am a professional gay. If you want to know what that means, I think we can discuss that later on. Let me introduce to you my panel here. I've got Zini Gordon, who is a bit mysterious because she has asked me to just introduce her as the interim chair of PLUS, the LGBTI Business Network. So that's it. That's all we can hear about Zini. And then we've got Dr. His first name is Masiwa. I hope I got that correct.
Yes.
Regis Gunda, who holds a PhD from the University of Bayreuth in Germany. His research interest, I think this also will actually help us engage because it's something that has always been an issue amongst the LGBTI population. His interests cover the intersections of the Bible and social justice in the biblical world and the contemporary societies. So I hope we will engage on that and hear what narratives or way forward for accelerating our change will be. Then we've got, at the corner, they've got Bon, who is from Malawi. Bon, his other name is Brian as well, so I think we've got a lot of Brians here. Brian Kanyuma, who is a native Malawian and a policeman. I'm not sure in South Africa we call them policemen and women. We also don't, pay attention to the fact that not everyone conforms. I'm not sure if policeman or a police officer would work in the context of Malawi.
Police office.
Okay, thank you so much. So that is our panel. So now, I want us to have a discussion now. We know we've had activists, we've had movements, I think, for a quite number of years. But perhaps the question is the movement or activism effective? And if it is effective, what does the society or the communities think about our activism or about our LGBTI people as a whole? Perhaps we can start with Bon, who is a police officer, to tell us in their sector, how do you view LGBTI people and how do you view their activism?
I will explain more about my country, Malawi. Yeah. In Malawi, the people with LGBTIs, they have they are facing a lot of troubles. Yeah, because Malawi is not legalizing such kind of stuff. So people used to go like they do it, but in they hide up. They don't show them. Walking around, they start fight them. So we do go there and take them to the police custody to at least to make them to be safe.
So you take them into custody to protect them?
Yeah, to protect them.
Not to persecute them?
No.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. That's an interesting narrative. I've never heard of that before. Regis, since your interests are in the biblical studies, I know in our churches, the most popular scripture that is being used, to discriminate LGBTI populations would be Leviticus 18:22. that says no man should lie in bed with another man as if it's a woman. But if you consult with the Bible and you read further, Matthew 19:12 speaks about eunuchs. I'm not sure if you are familiar with that. And it says, I quote, "For there are eunuchs who were born that way, and there are eunuchs who have been made eunuchs by others. And there are eunuchs who choose to be eunuchs, I think, to enter into the kingdom of God. Those who can accept this should accept this." And I'm sure there's no one who has ever had this in their church. So it's clear that obviously the church or religion views us, as sinners. That's what we are called. And based on that, we know how it outplays in the societies, because religion has so much power. And we can also speak about religion without touching into culture and tradition. So in your experience with working with the religious sector or in your biblical studies, how is the LGBTI population perceived or viewed?
Thank you. To begin with, I think, and focusing on the public narrative on LGBTIQ persons within the Southern African region, yes, the public narrative is largely informed by religion, by culture, and Southern Africa being predominantly Christian, the role of the Bible is quite significant in the sense and in a way in which it influences not only Christians but also non-Christians. So you have traditional and cultural leaders who argue against LGBTI persons, concluding their narratives or their arguments by saying even the Bible agrees with what we are saying. So suggesting that the Bible does indeed play a critical role in the framing and articulation of public attitudes. In that regard, we do have texts in the Bible that are hardly used in churches, particularly because all churches practice one form or another of selective use of the Bible. So churches pick those texts that are in line with their agenda, while silencing those that they think do challenge their agenda. And then in general, moving away from scripture specifically to the public narrative, what is it that people are saying about LGBTI persons within the region? One of the dominant narratives is obviously, as highlighted in earlier sections, where homosexuality or sexual minorities are presented as foreign. They are made in Europe. They are made in America.
It takes us back to what Ricky said in the morning, that what we currently have when you're trying to define LGBTI lives is influenced by the West. I mean, the fact that terminologies are in English and we have nothing in isiZulu or Yoruba creates, that perception that it's not African. Yep.
So that's I think one of the most dominant narratives.
Yes.
The second and interesting narrative, which is influenced by the fact that we're operating from a patriarchal background, is that African gay men, African lesbian women are all women to Western partners. So they're in it because we are coming from a background where we think the boyfriend provides for the girlfriend.
Yes.
And therefore, African men being poor cannot be boyfriends. And therefore, they have to be girlfriends of someone with resources.
Which means in this case, if I'm in a relationship with another man and I'm the one who's unemployed, I'm the one perhaps without an educational background, it is presumed that I'm the wife.
Yes. So that's I think another of the public narratives that you have.
And that's where patriarchy plays a role as well.
Yeah, because I think our thinking is influenced by this patriarchal background that we have.
Yes.
And so we can't think outside of this power relationship in intimate relationships. There has to be a provider, there has to be a receiver, and since men are supposed to be the dominant ones, it means the one with resources plays the role of the man, and naturally that's supposed to be the Western boyfriend. So, yeah, so I think this is, but there are more. I think I would leave to my colleague to add some more, and then we can come back and add some more that would
I think it would be interesting to, know what happens now if the woman in a heterosexual relationship is the one who's working and who has all the money. So is the man now presumed to be the woman as well? But
maybe
we'll
she
come
goes
back
on
to
top.
that. So Zini, you are in business. We'll keep it to that. I want to know, how do you perceive LGBTI people? Because in my personal experience, business only cares about us, actually about our pink money. That's what you call it, the pink currency. The fact that in my household, it'll be two men without kids and all of that. So you see an opportunity there, as a business entity to make money. So I want to know, do you see LGBTI people beyond their pink currency, or is there another way that you view us?
So maybe I can start off by connecting what has emerged from colleagues here. Just to reiterate the discriminatory and stereotype messaging that remains predominant, and linking that to a predominant focus on objectification of LGBTI sexuality. So quite a bit has been done by several organizations, institutions that have raised awareness about LGBT rights. And in South Africa, we have gone as far as, having those rights entrenched in our constitution. However, as you have indicated, I'm currently, the interim chair of PLUS, which is an LGBTI business network, which was launched in May this year. And from the perspective of PLUS, we tested, whether there was any value to try and ascertain whether the rights that are entrenched have actually, had an effect on a positive effect on the economic spaces that are occupied by the LGBTI community. So we've tested this out by engaging persons in different provinces and to test really whether there would be some value to expanding the activism to be inclusive of economic activism. And time again, there was an overwhelming sense that there would be definite value to engaging with the movement at this level. Of course, when we had thought about what could be done, we had very definite ideas about the spaces that LGBTI persons occupied, informed by some of the messaging that is said to be paternalistic. It's focused on gay men. Time and time again this morning, there have been several references to the silence of other voices that are in the community. And this was evident in the work to prepare for the launch of PLUS, where we engaged communities in several provinces, that the issues are very different. So whereas we thought, persons are, a lot of LGBTI business people are engaged, mostly in fashion, in events, in the stereotype.
Tight jeans.
Exactly.
Baggy pants for lesbian women.
Yes. So When we went out, it was very different. It was very ordinary people really struggling economically, jobless, but also with very, not different to other young people that are struggling with economic engagement, but with a very definite sense that there was a further discrimination that is linked to the added element of, the intersectionality issues, being lesbian, being gay, being lesbian, black, short maybe, yeah. So all those elements play out, and of course, what I consider is that there's a very definite role that can be used to begin to use economic empowerment to expand inclusion, to begin to hear the voices, to begin to have people, LGBTI community, making a positive change.
Okay, so I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but as you were speaking, you spoke about a new term that I've never heard before. You spoke about economic activism. So I'm not sure if you'd like to break that down for us, because, I think activism is evolving. One would always tell you about holding placards at the union buildings and making sure that we make so much noise until the president listens, or we draft a memorandum of some sort and, deliver it to the policymakers. So can you please, and I'm sorry to put you on the spot, just explain to us what economic activism is all about.
Okay, so here's the thing. I'm going to again speak from the perspective of PLUS.
Okay.
PLUS stands on the shoulders of like really great organizations that have paved the way, yeah, to fight for the rights of LGBTI community, be it around equality, equity, be it around access to healthcare services, be it around access to fair labor practices. Yeah. So this is just an expansion to say there is still much activism that is needed in this economic space that ensures engagement economically through what happens in the workplace, yeah, because we know within the workplace there's still a lot of homophobia and still exclusion in the workplace. So a lot is happening in the space around workplace affinity groups. There's a lot that has been happening around rules around diversifying, or thoughts about work that needs to look at practices in corporates that enable a broader expansion of previously disadvantaged groups to be included. So around that, but also around entrepreneurship support. Yeah.
For the LGBTI population. Yes. And how accessible are these services?
Well, currently we're still at we've just launched, so we're still at its the infancy. We're now looking at a membership drive, looking at an offer, a value offer that meets the needs that are on the ground. Yeah. Okay. So hopefully by next year, a lot more people should be benefiting from the forum. Okay, yeah.
Thank you so much. Regis, I think Zini just told us about economic activism, and I think the kind of work that you do is also another form of activism. In your experience, do you think activism has changed, and perhaps we also need to align ourselves with the current changes, or are things still the same? I think the world has evolved. There's technology. I, for one, I don't think some people don't have the energy anymore to go and picket somewhere. Someone would rather tweet or post a Facebook status, and there's always that debate within the LGBTI community that we are always fighting. We're always on the forefront, and people come and benefit. And they're not present at the movements. And they also make fun of what they call them cyber activists. So I would like to know from you, do you think activism has changed? Is there space for the latest trends in the activism sphere?
Well, I think in every sphere, there is need to diversify and to move with times.
Yes.
But at the same time, there are certain traditional things that we don't need to get rid of. I would never suggest that we go all social media in terms of our activism, because there is really no substitute for physical presence in activism. So we need that element, but that element now also needs to be combined with recent trends. Because as we can see from this gathering, when you compare with last year in Pietermaritzburg, we're having more youngsters around us, youngsters who are much more well-versed with social media. And so if we take away that from them, we limit their participation. If we insist always on physical presence, we also exclude that generation that is much more in sync with recent trends. But if we also insist on recent trends, we disenfranchise the oldies in the movement, whose presence is critical in giving guidance to the youngsters so that we have a continuous movement rather than disjuncted movements, across generations. So I think what has been happening actually within the movement is an adaptation to the realities of today. So we maintain that physical presence and physical visibility, but not only physically, we're also becoming more visible on social media, which is helping quite a lot in terms of making the movement reach out to as many people as possible. So I would say that there is need for that diversification to be maintained, to be entrenched, so that we continue to draw benefits across the various platforms that are available. The other thing that I would add, coming back, I think, to the initial question on the public narrative, is the way in which the public has reduced sexual minorities to sexual animals. The general understanding is that sexual minorities don't do anything other than having sex, and I'm actually surprised that no one is having sex here, actually.
Well, you don't know what we do behind closed doors. So, yeah. But yeah.
Because
can we regroup? Yeah.
Because the public narrative.
So that has always been the narrative.
Yeah, the public narrative is that sexual minorities don't work. They're basically useless in everything else except having sex. And if you go back to, it's still very difficult for us Zimbabweans to say former president. Since I started writing, I always knew that the name of the leader of the country is always one. So I'm likely to fail an exam if I were to write one asking for the name of the president, because I would possibly write the wrong one. But if you go back to him, and I like what Chester said, he has done great work for sexual minorities.
Yeah.
Negatively, but then he is actually the guy who brought sexual minorities into the public domain. And I think Gauss has capitalized on that by having that publicity from the president himself. But he said in 1995, how can we tolerate people that are asking to have rights to have sex in the streets? Yes, that's what he said in 1995.
Yes.
And because of that, the narrative has always reduced sexual minorities to people who only want to have sex, who only think of having sex, who do nothing. And so it's important as we move forward to bring forward not only the unemployed gay, because that's also part of the propaganda.
Yes.
But to bring out the professional accountant who only happens to be gay, because that's just a small component of his life. He is a professional accountant who is running a company, who is doing all good things professionally in his job, but whose life is simply reduced to wanting to have sex. So that's, I think, another of the public narratives that you are having within the region. And this is not limited to Zimbabwe. You get it across the region.
Across the region,
Yeah,
yes. So before we continue, I think I need to make everyone aware that Brian is not feeling well, so he might be coming in and out. So please bear with us. So before we move on to Zini, I want to ask you, since, well, you are an ally, I think, which is an interesting perspective, because I remember there was some commotion on Facebook a few years ago, and a lesbian woman was public about the fact that they, as a lesbian movement, do not need heterosexuals to help them in fighting for their, for fighting their struggle. And then I sat down and thought about, the struggle for liberation and for democracy in South Africa as well. That we had white people as well who were, helping us out, I think. So I want to understand, have you ever encountered, negativity from the LGBTI population for coming into the field and trying to tell their narrative? Or, I think to some extent you are. So have you ever encountered any negativity from the population?
Well, not only from the LGBTI community, actually, but from both sides.
Yes.
Because you are a hetero who is interested in justice for sexual minorities. And so when I started this, when I started developing my PhD proposal in 2005, that's when I really started engaging with girls to try and understand what was going on within the movement. And I was completely blank. I didn't know what to expect. And the stereotypes were such that you always want the chair that's next to the door, so you have to run away.
Yes.
So you can imagine the fear that I had. And I was then a young man who didn't know anything about sexual minorities, but out of curiosity and being a lecturer in a university, was interested in finding out more. So when I started sharing with colleagues in the university what my interests were for my PhD, that raised flags. What is this guy really up to?
Yeah.
Is he one of them?
Yeah.
So gradually people avoided me because they also were afraid of being heated by me. And then when I moved to girls, to talk to Keith, and unfortunately he's late. He also wasn't too sure whether to trust me because there were many things that were wrong about me. I was a hetero, I was a Christian, and I was working for a state university whose chancellor was none other than you know who. So that I think in a way made me unwanted in both sides. I was never fully gay, and I was no longer fully hetero because of my interest to champion the cause and to understand the plight of LGBTI persons. So that happened, but gradually I should admit that I eventually was reintegrated within the hetero community and fully integrated within the gay community. So I now enjoy the best of both worlds.
Yeah, I like
so. So yeah, I have passed to those offices. If I say Dr. Gunda on the gate opens. And now I am invited to speak to bishops, to speak to clergy within Christian denominations about sexual minorities. Because while they may not be comfortable listening to Chester, they're comfortable listening to me because, well, to a certain extent, I'm one of them.
Yes.
So that has really helped in terms of my work because now I can walk in between the different worlds and try to use that to
That
try
to
and
bridge-
bring them
bridge the
together
different
and
worlds,
to,
yeah.
to create a platform that we can actually have some discussions between the two entities. So yes, the negativity has been there, but it's I think understandable because you're dealing with a threatened group. They can't just trust people,
Yes, it could be a spy.
particularly if you're an outsider. Yes,
Yeah.
so I understood why I was being sidelined in a way, given a cold shoulder. But interestingly, a cigarette held between me and Keith. Because when we smoked together, he also started questioning
Your motive.
my Christian faith, maybe.
Oh, okay.
So, yes, so some small things
Yes.
do great things.
Yeah, that's
Thank
true.
you.
That's true. Okay, Zini, back to you. Earlier on, you mentioned issues of homophobia in the business sector. And I know we always speak about homophobia and not necessarily about transphobia, you know, or the phobia against bisexuals. Could this be because trans people can't get into the business sector? Or are they there?
Well, the voices of the trans community is becoming louder. Yeah?
And louder.
And louder.
Yeah.
But still not loud enough. Yeah, we still pretend to be one big happy family with the same concerns.
Yes.
The reality is that even within the LGBTI
There's
community,
still some-
we are not a homogeneous group.
Yeah, as I always say, that I think the gay movement came and overtook, you know, and we hijacked the trans movement. And here we are, I think in South Africa at most, we are a bit comfortable. We forgot about the trans people. And we just let them out in the cold, and we are not helping them advance their needs.
Yes.
I won't even talk about bisexuals and intersex people because they are almost non-existent when we talk in our corridors. And I think it's mainly because gay people do benefit from, you know, from having a penis, if I were to put it like that. You know, patriarchy and masculinity puts gay people and even gay organizations or movements at a higher pedestal. Lesbian organizations do not have funding, but where there's, you know, a gay man, probably white, will have all the millions in dollars as well. So I think that's another reason why. Yeah.
Absolutely. And though we say we need to hear their voices, we need more diverse voices coming out stronger, that when we hear them, we say, well, actually, not too loud.
Yes,
yeah?
yes,
So there are
yes,
these
yes,
mixed
yes,
messages that keep emerging, yeah? Not too proud, not too loud, you know, stay in your lane, you
Yes,
know?
yes, stay in your lane, yes.
Kind of thing. So there are these mixed messages that somehow keep people on the fringes, yeah, where people don't feel they can own public spaces, and before owning them, are unable to be included.
So apart from making the business sector accessible to the LGBTI population, are you doing any kind of work to ensure that you sensitize the business sector towards LGBTI, you know, struggles and issues? I think, for example, I foresee a situation whereby you sensitize human resource practitioners to be sensitive towards particularly trans people. Because I know if someone has not finished their transitioning process and they come to an interview, what they present as will probably be different to what the ID document says.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that has always been a point where people are discriminated and they don't get jobs. So are you doing anything around that?
Well, not at the moment, but I know that the intention of PLUS is also to connect with what is happening in the workplace. We have been engaging with several workplace affinity groups that bring those issues to the table.
Okay.
Yes, and the intention is that there's greater engagement by diverse groups into what are the issues and how
We address the issues.
how these can be addressed.
Thank you. So the pink money issue,
The reality is that the LGBTI community is a force to be reckoned with. The pink dollar is a big issue.
Yes.
However, if the challenge is that if we focus only on that, it tends to pitch the focus on a very small minority, which is white, men,
yes.
gay, yeah, and forgets that actually the majority of the LGBTI community find themselves in very different spaces. And what we need to address is to address the dignity issue, yeah, of enabling people to participate.
Participate in the economy.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly.
Okay.
And to begin to shift through that participation in the economic space,
narrative
to
altogether.
change the narrative, to begin to challenge the stereotypes, and to begin to be to make the small significant changes within our communities. If within our families we are seen as engaged, we are seen as independent, however that independence may be, we begin to make people think twice. Yeah, we begin to get our community members who see sometimes LGBTI community as useless, as Harise said, and to see begin to shift that to be seen as contributing members of society.
Thank you. So now, I think Danilo in the morning spoke about the intersectionalities of struggles. And the fact that you're speaking about your forum and that you want to make the business sector accessible to everyone. I think I foresee a future whereby trans people, particularly, not that I'm being biased, but I think their experiences have made us see more trans people, dropping out of school. And if you drop out of school, you won't get a decent job. And most of them resort to what? Most of them resort to sex work. Not that there's anything wrong with sex work, but some are forced by circumstances because they couldn't finish school due to being discriminated at school, due to families not, accepting and understanding who they are. So I think if your forum actually really achieves, its objective, change will happen, and everyone across can be able to participate in the economy. So, Regis, now when you come back to the intersectionalities of struggles, I understand that your work is not only focused on the LGBTI, issues or challenges they face. Are you doing anything to link the different struggles to perhaps align LGBTI issues with women's rights issues, with issues of child abuse, with issues of access to perhaps, I know the biggest struggle now would be also in Africa, the land issue. So are you doing anything to align the struggles? Because the fact that someone is gay doesn't mean that's where they end. It could be a man, there could be a woman who also needs access to decent housing or water, access to water as well. So are you doing anything to align the different struggles that are there?
Thank you. Before I come there, I would want to pick on the point that she was raising, which you also raised on the pink money.
Yes.
I think there's a huge misinformation within the public narratives
Yes.
regarding money within the LGBTI community. The challenge, I think, basically is of a young gay man or a young man who is residing in the
posh
poorest of poor suburbs,
Yeah.
who wakes up tomorrow renting an apartment in Sandton, if it's in South Africa, or in Borodale, in Harare, in the plush, these rich suburbs, showing an unconventional turn of, resources within their capacity. The narrative of a struggling young boy born and bred in the poor suburbs, who remains in the poor suburbs despite being gay, is not out there in the public. what's in the public is that people are in it for the money. That money is the motivation behind being
Yes,
gay.
being gay, yes,
And,
yes,
and I think that's one of the dominant narratives, which comes back to what I said earlier about the suspected Western boyfriend who is pouring resources and so on. So that's really one of those narratives that you also see across the region, not only in South Africa, not only in Zimbabwe, but really within the SADC region. That's a common narrative, that people are gay because they are in it for the money. And so the poor, struggling young man who is gay is erased in the public sphere. It's always the story of before gay, poor, after gay, rich.
Oh, yes, yes.
So that's the kind of narrative that you get in the public domain, which I think if we look around, we can all see that it's not real, but it is in the public domain. Now, coming on to the alignment of struggles, I think that's a critical area to focus on, particularly because as Africans, we are aware now that as we waged the struggle against colonialism, we became too focused on colonialism alone, that we forgot all other forms of marginalizations, all other forms of exploitation and oppression that were happening.
Yes, yes,
that as we all came together, and this is the challenge which she was also highlighting within the LGBTIQ community, in that as we identify a common goal, there is a danger of forgetting the other smaller groups within the larger group. And to an extent where when we eventually think we have succeeded in achieving that larger goal, we realize that
Something else
the
pops
smaller
up.
groups have been left behind.
Yes, yes.
And which I think forces us to rethink in terms of how we look at the struggle, so that we do not postpone other struggles so we can proceed with this one struggle. So as a researcher and a writer, what I've been doing, and of late, one of the key topics that have been getting funding and an area that we've been working on is the area of sexual and reproductive health and rights, which basically covers everyone. But unfortunately, depending with who is funding what, there are certain issues that basically you're told by funders not to include.
Issues like?
Obviously, depending, we were doing a manual on sexual and reproductive health for an organization whose funding basically was coming from the American Christian Right. And when we had done the manual, we had a chapter on sexual minorities. And so when we submitted the draft, it came back without the chapter.
Without your knowledge, or without consulting with
Well,
you?
it's their manual. It's not mine. It's their manual. So at the end of the day, I don't control what they will publish.
Yep.
I do the work that they've asked me to do to the best of my ability, addressing all the issues that I as a researcher think are important to be addressed in the subject of sexual and reproductive health and rights. But as an organization, it's their prerogative to then edit what I have done.
Yes, yes.
And that's one experience. And it's actually this year that this has happened.
This year?
Yes.
Okay.
And another manual that I've been working on the same subject, but for a different organization, I included trans people
Was that accepted?
when I was discussing gender. And I was told when I had an initial meeting after I submitted the draft that we should take out the trans because it's not really an area that we're interested in. And I said, look, the manual is yours.
So they can do whatever
You
they
can,
want.
you can do what you want to do, but I will not remove it.
Okay, no.
You have the power to veto it,
whatever you want
but
to do.
I will not do it. So I will keep my draft with it,
Okay.
but you can produce what you want without it. So currently, they're also haggling amongst themselves. And information I got a few days ago is that they will keep it and then tell facilitators and trainers not to use it. So these are things that are happening where one struggle is being taken away from other struggles that could benefit from that.
I think
So
for,
I think
for obvious reasons, because we know how we know the attitudes of the society
Yeah.
in the region. Can I perhaps ask us to stop there and pause actually and open, for open the floor for questions?
Yes.
I think we'll start with 3 questions. Remember, as they did earlier on, 1 question, keep it brief because time is not on our side.
there are hands that far end there.
There's a hand here, there's a hand there, and then there's another hand there. We'll come back for another round if there's still time. So please keep it brief.
Thank you. Okay, all right. Panelists, I'm shook, not shaken. Why do I say so? You have brought out 2 things that are very profound to me as an activist. By the way, I'm from Zambia. My name is McLean. So the first thing that you spoke about yourself was the patriarchy. This is very, very true. In Africa, when you talk about gay men and why they are stigmatized against, mostly it comes from the patriarchy angle. So patriarchy, in this case, we're talking about a man should be in charge on so many levels. Economically, he's supposed to be the provider. But even sexually, you're supposed to be in charge. So you're supposed to be the one who's in charge, flip over the woman, whatever it is. But so when I, as an African, I look at a gay man, the first thing that comes to my mind is he's been screwed. Excuse my French, eh? Yeah. But you know what I'm talking about. So for Africans, particularly in the Southern African region like you alluded to, and the Christianity background, for them it's unacceptable. How can a man be done by another man? So that's layer number 1. So layer number 2, we're talking about...
Remember, only 1.
No, it's 1 point. It's 1 point. Yeah. It's 1 point, but it's got 2 layers.
Okay.
I'll be brief. Okay. So the second layer is the aspect of poverty. You talked about how the black African gay man is always looked at as in it for the money. Maybe he was living in a poor section of society and tomorrow he's driving some fancy car and everything. And the first thing that comes to people's mind is he's got a rich boyfriend somewhere. And this rich boyfriend is white or another race other than the black race. But also want to close to that, another aspect is that even in our movement as LGBTIs, most times we're looked at in the lens of they are doing it for the money. You walk into a space, activism space, you're walking in and they are thinking, oh, I think he's just failed in another area. He doesn't have a career, and this is the last resort. So it becomes very difficult sometimes to even bargain because people are just looking at you in the lens of, he hasn't got the money, he's in this because of the money. Even when you're negotiating, when we're pitching your ideas, they try to dangle carrots in front of you. So that's just an aspect I wanted to bring about.
Thank you. Thank you. There's another concern that just came now that people need to mind their language. I think some people are finding it offensive. But yeah, just as we continue, please, let's be mindful of our language.
Okay.
Thank you.
So my name's Chan. I was one of the panelists earlier on. I think mine is an observation on, I love allies. Okay, allies are great people because they can penetrate other spaces that we can't go into. But I think there's an issue of understanding what we're talking about. And I've noticed this happens in many platforms of saying LGBTIs or LGBTI people. There is a difference with every of those letters and a uniqueness and say, when I hear a person say LGBTI person, they mean a gay person. Yep. I haven't heard an analysis is over there about the B or the I, or the Qs, and how people view our communities and not a community, because it's not one community. How people view us is not based on an orientation level. It's the trans community that is visible, and the I, right, that is visible. But when we're doing our narratives, it's the gay people, because they are effeminate looking, they are not targeted because of that.
Yep.
It's what is deemed like cross-dressing or breaking the gender norms is what makes us vulnerable. And I would have loved to hear that analysis about what is visibly seen and what is related to.
Yep. Thank you for that. There was a hand there.
Thank you. My question is regarding the economic empowerment component. Everybody agrees that LGBTI people need economic empowerment. Okay, let's all agree, that's a consensus. How it happens, etc., is key. But how are we going to differentiate between economic empowerment and pinkwashing? Because there are many companies that are starting to exploit LGBTI issues and people to make their brands look good. And yet they are exploiting children, they're exploiting women. Monsanto, for example, the Human Rights Campaign just listed Monsanto as the top employer of LGBTI people. But Monsanto is keeping us poor because we can't use their seeds to grow food. Okay? And so we become the faces of these companies, and yet there are other things that they are doing to exploit us. Pesticides over food, GMO issues, etc. Are we going to become this movement of just co-option, that we're so desperate to belong somewhere that we will pose in front of a company banner and so on without questioning these companies? And I think we must be worried that our politics don't become shallower and shallower. And so how do we do economic empowerment and yet retain these businesses and hold them accountable for the various exploitations that they do? And I just want to know how that will happen in terms of not being pinkwashed in that particular way. Even trans people are being co-opted into these identities with companies, etc. Their company awards, we all celebrate the Feather Awards pushed by Chevrolet. Are we questioning these companies? Are we questioning Shell? Are we questioning all these, the Monsantos? In South Africa right now, we have a bill that is protecting the production of seeds, of food seeds. So we won't be able to even purchase seeds to grow in our homes for food production. So I think we need to think about these things at another level.
Okay. Thank you for
And I will need some clarity on a particular term. So before you put a label on me, I'm a human being. So before you start talking about my race, my nationality, my religion, and so on and so forth, I'm a human being and I have rights as a human being, which are universal rights, right? So I have a problem with the term LGBTI rights or gay rights or lesbian rights. So my question is, what do gay rights look like? Because I am a human being before you put a label on me. And as such, as a human being, I have rights which are inborn. I do not inherit them. They're not given to me. These are rights which I'm born with. I'm entitled to them. These are my entitlements. So when I hear the term gay rights, it gets me to wonder, what do gay rights look like? So yeah, I'll need some clarity on that. Thank you.
Thank you for that. There was a hand in the front row.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zodwa Ranyadi from Joburg, location called Soweto. the first location after FNB Stadium. Okay, Mr. Rejao, I have this question because I heard you talk about the Bible, whatever. I would like to know, to whom does the Bible belong?
Okay.
Does it belong to Africa or does it belong to Western countries? And because why I'm asking this question, most of the time, if not all the churches, they talk about the Leviticus. But they don't normally talk about the 10 Commandments. Because when I read my Bible, it says we are created in the image of God. So how can you love God whereas you don't love the next person who sits next to you? So if maybe the Bible comes from the Western, and then we leave it aside, which means there was not going to be having this hatred in Africa, where does it belong? To whom? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I will ask the panel now to respond to the questions and comments. Can we please keep it brief so that we can have another round of questions?
You want to go first?
Do you want to start?
Oh, sorry, there was a hand. You see, now because time is not on our side, I'm trying to rush. Sorry about that. There was a hand at the back.
Hi, I came from Malawi. I'll just get you back from the point where Mr. Police officer was saying about the LGBTI people.
Yes.
My question is, how are you going to protect us as LGBT people according to Malawi? Because we have heard from him that we are not aware about the community that will still persist there.
I think it's a bit unfortunate that he's not here, but that's a question we can take forward to the working groups that will happen after this session. And perhaps we can raise that question and discuss it further. But thank you for that. So yeah, back to the panel. In brief, can we please respond to the questions that were posed?
Okay. I will begin with the gentleman who spoke about allies. And I fully understand that in our presentation, particularly my presentation of the public narrative, it sidelined other components within the community at large or within the communities that have come together. But it was also partly deliberate in the sense that when you listen to the narratives within the public domain, it's reduced to gay men, specifically because it is the relationship between two men that confuses people within the region particularly. And so when it comes to lesbians, people don't feel too threatened because there is no penis in it. The problem is where you have two penises in a relationship. And that's why gay men become the focus of, if you look at the public discourse, the public narrative, it's reduced really to the relationship between two men. And so when we were presenting the public narratives, we tried to capture that also. And you'll find the interesting thing is that while the region is particularly afraid of gay men, they think that trans people are actually gay.
Yes.
So that's part of the challenge. If a trans woman passes, they think they're gay.
Yes.
If it's a trans man, then they also consider that to be within the realm of a gay and narrative of gay people. And so that's why we were not very specific on trans people, because they're not coming into the public discourse as trans people. They are actually included in the discourse because society mistake them for being gay. So that was one element. And then I fully understand that as an ally, I can understand to a certain extent, not completely. I can never feel like a gay man. As one professor puts it, we can describe what a fish is doing in a fish pond, but we can never feel or express how it feels to be a fish in a fish pond, because we are not fish and we are not in the fish pond as fish. So I understand that my knowledge, my understanding is also limited because I'm only an ally. So I fully concur with that observation. That as allies, we have our limitations. On LGBTIQ rights, and I'm not a rights specialist, so I will answer from a layman's perspective as far as I understand it. I think it's because of the recognition of within the human race, the existence of certain groups that need special attention because they have faced challenges because of their diversity. I think that's why you also have children's rights. That's why we also have women's rights, even though these are not separate rights from the general human rights. These are special articulations of rights that must be extended to groups that were once excluded. So that's how I've always understood it, that it's not in a way trying to say LGBTIQ rights are separate from human rights, but that human rights need to be extended fully to people that belong to these other groups within society. And who is the owner of the Bible? That's a much more difficult question because while the Bible came to us as a document that emerged not even in Europe, because the origins of the Bible are within the Middle East, particularly in Israel, but its road from Israel has gone through Europe, and then it came to us, particularly sub-Saharan Africa. We were exposed to the Bible through European imperialism. And so naturally, the interpreters, the official interpreters possess power. And so when the Bible was interpreted to us by Western missionaries, it was read from their perspective, a perspective that was also determined by the fact that there was, to a certain extent, a conspiracy to develop a working black race. So even one of the popular stories that we read, the Sodom narrative, when we were growing up, it was about obedience, because the intention was to create a pliant black race that would work for the white masters. And so the whole issue of homosexuality and so on, we never knew that when we were growing up. We were singing about the disobedient wife of Lot, because that was the lesson that they wanted us to get from that text. So you can see how interpreters possess power over the text. And it's an interesting transaction. It's like a constitution. We all are responsible for making our constitutions, and then we all surrender our power to that constitution. So we disempower ourselves and empower the constitution, but then we elect leaders who all of a sudden appropriate all the power that we have deposited in the constitution for their own use, to exploit us. And this is what happens with powerful texts and documents such as the Bible. The interpreters become very powerful because they become representatives of God, and most of us here don't want to fight against God. And so at the end of the day, if someone comes to us and says, this is what God is saying, we tend to acquiesce because we don't want to fight God. And these guys will never come to us and say, you're fighting me because this is what I'm saying. They say, I'm only saying this because this is what God is saying. And so at the end of the day, if you fight, it's like you're fighting against God. And so it becomes very dangerous, tough to fight against. And also for the movement, we need to find ways of working with the Bible, because it already has people behind it. If we throw the Bible away, we marginalize ourselves from the communities that we want to work with. And I think this is why we have so many of us working with LGBTI persons and trying as much as we can to show that the Bible does say a lot of good things about all people, and that we can appropriate the Bible for our struggle. Because if we don't, then we become what the larger society wants us to become, people who are anti the Bible, people who are anti-God, people who are basically anti-social. And so if we can appropriate the Bible, because it now belongs to us.
But I guess there's nothing wrong as well with someone being an atheist as well.
No,
Because
there's really nothing wrong.
Yeah.
But if you go out and say, I'm an atheist, and I think, there's nothing wrong with gay people,
Yeah.
then they pick on you being an atheist. It's because you don't believe in God, and you're talking to people that believe in God. So that also becomes another problem and a weakness in the movement.
Thank you for that. Zini,
Yes.
yeah,
Maybe
then
just
we close.
starting off with the question, just to reiterate, the focus on gay rights. Gay rights are human rights. And I think the intention is to specifically look at focusing on the discriminatory practices that have been based purely on sexual orientation, as you said, or gender or women's rights that focus purely on discrimination on the basis you are women, just as much. It's the same kind of sentiment, but as you rightly say, gay rights are inherently human rights, fundamentally. Just to get to Jabo's issue around concerns about pinkwashing and exploitation, the focus on economic empowerment is really not targeted at blindly focusing or blind acceptance. English sometimes it goes. Acceptance of big corporates and the exploitative practices. No, on the contrary, we really are proposing and working on vigilance of such practices, which is why we start off with vigilance within workspaces, which furthermore would look at vigilance around practices that are exploitative. However, there are already critical organizations that are challenging organizations like Monsanto on the current practices. 4Plus, as the LGBTI business, currently the focus is really in the context of, starting off with South Africa, at enabling, at empowering, at connecting, and building entrepreneurship and personal, and not to say that it is a panacea for the challenges around unemployment. It is, however, an opportunity that a lot of LGBTI persons seem to continue to be disengaged from, purely because of, current practices that haven't focused on that. And the intention is, how do we change that? How do we put in place mechanisms? How do we put in place tools that enable and connect and include to ensure that there's a fair amount of dignity that is facilitated or supported through economic engagement?
I think in closing, I'd like to thank our panelists for making themselves available and for engaging, and thanks for the questions and the comments. In parting, I would like to share a few words. I think this applies to everyone, irrespective of how we identify or which struggle we align ourselves with. It's a famous poem by a German Lutheran pastor called Martin Niemöller, and it says, "First they came for the communists, and I did not speak out because I was not a communist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and still I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. They came for the Jews, and still I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. And now they came for me, but there was no one to speak out for me." Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.